Awesome, thank you. So today, welcome again to everyone to our Greater Boston Climate Action Plan Stakeholder and Community Engagement Kickoff. This is our first listening session for our planning process, and we're so excited that you could join us here today. A little bit of Zoom housekeeping. We do ask that you please keep yourself on mute when not talking. Feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions, and we will have time after the presentations to do a brief Q&A. And then we also ask that you rename yourself in Zoom. You can go up to your three little dots in your right-hand corner, and please make sure that you have your name and then your organization and community affiliation there. And as we get started, we would also love for you to introduce yourself in the chat. If you would go ahead and enter your name, your role or title, and from your municipality or organization, we would love to hear who we have with us today on the line. Today's presenters will include myself. I'm Sasha Scheideroff, a principal planner on the Clean Energy Department at MAPC, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Jeremy Koo, our Assistant Director of Clean Energy, and Ali Shepard, our Clean Energy and Climate Planner. For those of you who don't know or may not be familiar, MAPC is the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. We are the regional planning agency that serves Greater Metro Boston, and we work with 101 cities and towns across the region. As part of our regional plan, our work is guided by Metro Common 2050 in our mission to help support smart growth and regional collaboration across our 101 communities. And as part of Metro Common 2050, we also have robust climate goals. So we have a goal of advancing greenhouse gas reduction and clean energy work to meet a net zero by 2050 goal. We also are working to better prepare our region for the impacts of climate change, whether it's adapting or becoming resilient to those impacts, and improving our access to and quality of a healthy environment. And all of these climate priorities help advance our work locally and regionally. So in today's session, we're doing the welcome and introductions right now. So thank you everyone for introducing yourselves in the chat. I will be going through an overview of the Greater Boston Climate Action Plan and the planning process. We will have time for a Q&A from that overview, and then we will be going into breakout group discussions. Those will be facilitated, so you have other folks from MAPC on the line to help with those conversations. And then we'll come bring everyone back to the big group with some short report backs and then overview of the next steps. So I wanted to start off with a little bit of context around why climate planning. So as we all know, climate change is happening now. These two graphics show both the annual carbon emissions, historic and projected global emissions, as well as global temperature change. And we've seen that both carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions have sort of increased drastically over the last really like 30 to 50 years, and so has our temperature globally. And the amount of global warming and climate change that we experience is really dependent on the global emissions and how successful we are at reducing emissions. So you can see in these two graphics where we have different scenarios of sort of highest scenario, mid scenario, and lowest scenario. So if we want to prevent the most drastic impacts of climate change, we really need to be drastically reducing our emissions rapidly over the next several decades. We also wanted to just share some of the context around urgency. Summer 2023 according to NASA, was the hottest summer on record since like global temperatures have been tracked. And this map shows sort of the deviation compared to a 1950 to 1980 average. So while you see some spots are a little warmer and some spots are a little cooler, we really do see that global temperatures haven't been increasing. And those increases then lead to the impacts of climate change that we all feel through different changing weather patterns, increased flooding, increased drought, extreme heat that much of the country and the globe experienced this year, and other climate impacts like extreme storms. So there really is a sense of urgency in doing this work, both locally, regionally, and at the state level. Under the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, the federal government, within this context of climate change is happening now and the need to drastically reduce carbon emissions, established $5 billion to help tackle climate pollution through state and local governments. So this program is administered by the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and is called the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, or CPRG. So some of you may have heard the acronym or may have been familiar with this. So during the planning grant phase, states as well as the 67 most populous metro areas were eligible for planning grants. So here in Massachusetts and New England, our region, Massachusetts, as the state, received a planning grant, as well as our greater Boston metro region, the Worcester metro region, and Providence, Rhode Island region as well. A little bit about our metro region. So the Metro Statistical Area, or MSA, is a federal designation. It's a little bit bigger than our sort of typical local designation. And it really is defined by a strong and sort of large population core and connected by various economic infrastructure and social ties. So the Greater Boston MSA in this project crosses 2 states, so Eastern Massachusetts and Southern New Hampshire, 7 RPAs, 167 municipalities, representing 4.9 million residents across the region. And while MAPC is leading the planning process, we're doing so in partnership with our sister planning agencies and commissions. So we're working with the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments, Old Colony Planning Council, and Merrimack Valley Planning Commission here in Massachusetts, as well as the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, Rockingham Planning Commission, and Nashua Regional Planning Commission in Southern New Hampshire. And this steering committee with the RPAs is really meant to help guide the planning process to make sure it's representative of the whole region, as well as support community and stakeholder engagement across the 167 communities. As a federally funded program, the CPRG and the planning processes are meant to also focus on benefits to disadvantaged communities within the region. So you may be familiar with the term Justice 40 communities, which is a federal government commitment to ensure that 40% of benefits are going towards communities that have historically or currently disadvantaged and impacted by fossil fuel industries and pollution. So on the left is the map of the designated Justice 40 communities. And on the right is our map from the state of Massachusetts for environmental justice designation. There's a lot of overlap, but our state's EJ designation is a little bit broader. And so as we go through the planning process, as well as the planning outcomes, we're really trying to focus on the communities that have been historically and presently impacted, and that we want to make sure that benefits are going to low income and disadvantaged communities. In terms of our project milestones for the first phase, the PCAP, Priority Climate Action Plan, is due by March 1st to the EPA. And that includes developing our first regional greenhouse gas inventory for the entire MSA, and developing then a priority climate action plan. And then we have a phase 2. So that March 1st obviously is a very soon deadline, very quick turnaround from when we first sort of received the grant in late summer. And then we'll have about another 18 months or so on top of that to develop a comprehensive climate action plan, or our CCAP. And that's an opportunity to continue to do engagement and to look broader across all sectors, as well as look at longer term emission reduction goals as well. So what's included in the PCAP? So within our PCAP, we've decided to focus on greenhouse gas reduction measures in the energy, buildings, and transportation sectors. We know that those 3 sectors make up the bulk of our GHG emissions here in Massachusetts and in our region. And we're hoping to identify 10 to 15 reduction measures that can really help drive down those emissions in the near to medium term. We're also going to be conducting a low income and disadvantaged communities benefits analysis, and authority to implement analysis. And the completion of the PCAP by March 1st is also required to be a requirement to be eligible for implementation grants, which we'll talk about in a few moments. In terms of the CCAP, which is the larger, more comprehensive plan, again, that will expand to all sectors. So including buildings, transportation, and energy, would also include waste, agricultural and working lands, and other sectors that emit greenhouse gas reductions. We will expand the number of reduction measures, expand the benefits analysis, and then also establish some targets for 2030 and 2050. And again, that's due in August of 2025. Throughout the PCAP and the CCAP process, we are planning to engage core stakeholders and community members. So we have launched and formed a municipal advisory group, which is comprised of staff from across the full region to help advise on the development and prioritization of goals. And then we're also in the process of forming a Justice 40 advisory group made up of nonprofits and community-based organizations from across the region. We'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of today's presentation, but we are still looking for members. So if you're interested in applying to be on the Justice 40 advisory group and you're from a nonprofit or CBO working within the region, we would love to hear from you. And then in addition to our advisory groups, we're going to be having a series of listening sessions, focus groups, workshops throughout both the PCAP and the CCAP to make sure that we're engaging folks across the region. One of the most common questions we get from municipalities and our stakeholders is, how does this regional plan relate to existing climate work? We know that many communities already have climate action plans or have been working on reducing emissions. We have an existing state plan. There's been a lot of work here in our region on climate planning. So why is it that we need to do a regional plan? Well, so this opportunity does give us the funding to be able to do our first ever region-wide climate action plan for Greater Boston, including the first regional greenhouse gas inventory. And it will help kind of bring everyone up to a level playing field in terms of communities that may not have a local plan, but are interested in learning from this work. So as much as possible, we're building upon existing plans, and we're hoping that this work can then help inform future municipal level work. It also gives us, planning at the regional scale gives us the benefit of how do we address shared challenges or things that maybe a single municipality can't do on its own. How do we start to address some of those at a regional scale or even a multi-municipal scale? So may not be the whole region wide or even MAPC's region wide, but multiple municipalities working together. And then again, too, with the guidance from the EPA and the federal government, there's an opportunity to center equity and co-benefits into this work as well. Some of the limitations of this work, though, particularly with the PCAP, is just the very tight timeline for that first deliverable goal on March 1st. We know that the PCAP will feel very, very rushed, both for us and stakeholders. And so we're also hoping to be able to extend a lot of this work that the groundwork that we're laying now into the comprehensive climate action plan over the next 2 years. So just a high level look at our timeline for, this is just for the PCAP, so the next 5 or so months. We started our work on the greenhouse gas inventory last month and kicking off with our listening session this month. Our advisory groups will meet throughout the PCAP timeline, and then we're hoping to host another sort of public listening session workshop in the winter, sort of mid to late January. And then our PCAP is due in March. Just a little bit of our current work. So as I mentioned, we are developing our regional greenhouse gas inventory with the assistance from Weston and Sampson as our technical consultant. And our team at MAPC has also been hard at work compiling strategies and actions that are in existing climate action plans to help gather ideas. And we're also hoping that during this listening session, we can gather ideas and feedback and input to help inform the plan. And in the near term, we're going to be finalizing our inventory, finalizing our 10 to 15 priority measures, and then doing our analysis work for that. And now, after much talking, I'm going to pass it off to Jeremy to talk a little bit about the CPRG implementation grants.
Hi, everyone. So one of the exciting pieces of the CPRG program in general is that as a kind of attached to the PCAP process, and perhaps the reason for why the brisk PCAP timeline is that the majority of the funding for the CPRG program is tied up in $4.3 billion of competitive grant funding that is open to states, tribes, and municipal entities, including municipal governments and regional planning agencies. These grants are tied very specifically to the measures that are identified in either the Greater Boston MSA PCAP or the state's PCAP that are developed through that first phase. So looking at the potential alignment between the PCAP as something that we want to prioritize as potentially items that could be applied for and funded through CPRG grants is sort of an important lens to consider beyond looking at the full scope of things. Obviously, with the timeline, we're not going to be able to include all potential priority emissions reductions measures in the PCAP. But that being said, with the there's more room to do that in the CCAP, and we're sort of keeping our eye on what the opportunities here are for aligning the PCAP with some of the priorities for implementation support. I will note that the CPRG implementation grants are awarded sort of by funding tranches. So at the top level, there's a 200 to 500 million per award tranche, and at the low end, there's a 5 to 10 million. And so there are, there can be the opportunity for getting multiple applications in from our region as part of this. That being said, we are trying to coordinate closely with the state, given that there's a note in the notice of funding opportunity about sort of geographic distribution of funding across all of the states and regions that are being funded. And while a few states chose not to participate, the vast majority of states in the union chose to participate in this program. And so it will be competitive, and there will be, frankly, a limit to, we expect, to the amount of funding that will come to Massachusetts and its communities. So we're staying closely in contact with our other RPAs throughout the state, and also with the state Office of Climate Innovation Resilience, which is coordinating their process for developing the state implementation grants. We are while the application is due for this a month after the PCAP is due, we are continuing conversations here, and we expect that while we ask that, I think we focus more on sort of the priorities and interests during this conversation on the sort of CPRG and the planning process as a whole. We expect that we'll be holding additional sessions in the future to talk more about specific priorities for implementation grants. And if I don't know if we do have Jonathan Schrag and Diane J from the state here, if there's anything that you wanted to add about the implementation grant piece.
Hey, thanks everyone. I will. Can people see me?
Unfortunately, no, but we can hear you. So,
Diana, are you on camera? Why don't you talk?
I'm on camera. I can get us started and I'll have you chime in. But hi everyone, my name is Diana. And yeah, I'm here with my colleague Jonathan, Deputy Climate Chief. We're both in the Governor's Office of Climate Innovation Resilience, which is the agency leading for the CPRG for the state. So I think you all gave an excellent overview of CPRG, so I don't feel like I need to clarify too much, but just everything that Sasha said, imagine that taken up to the level of the state. We have all of the same requirements for the CPRG, and we're working alongside the same timelines and the same deadlines. And yeah, similarly, given the nature of the PCAP, that shorter timeline, we're focusing our analyses right now on the transportation, buildings, and power sectors. And yeah, we're grateful to be collaborating with MAPC and the wider MSA here. So we'll be working as best as we can to stay in lockstep and keep attending meetings like this that come up, and have a shared goal of maximizing as much federal investment as we can into the state through this opportunity. So we'll be working on strategizing around the applications together around that. So Jonathan, I'll hand it over to you. I think we can see you now if you want to try.
Now everybody can see me. Hi everyone, sorry about that. So first, gratitude to MAPC for pulling everyone together, and they're terrific partners. We're really grateful to have them, as well as the Central Mass and Southeastern MSAs and RPAs involved in this process. So all of you are eligible under any of the priority measures that are in the MAPC Priority Climate Action Plan or the State Climate Action Plan. You just need to be covered by a plan. If you're out in Springfield or Greenfield, it's just the state plan. So you guys have a little bit, a few more options. With respect to the implementation grants, I will speak for the state and not for Jeremy or Sasha. We are not eager. We do not think it's going to be competitive for us to submit 351 applications. We think that EPA wants fewer applications that are more thought out, coherent, integrated together. There is an explicit discussion in the notice of funding opportunity around coalition applications. We are spending some time at the state working with Connecticut and Rhode Island to examine whether or not there are some opportunities to work on a regional scale, on a New England-wide scale, on topics that are kind of super big, whether that's offshore wind or heavy-duty truck transportation, or buying a jillion heat pumps and making them available at sort of discount cost. So we're working at that level. We will also submit something that is just statewide, but we think there are great opportunities for either RPAs or coalitions of cities to submit applications. I think this is not an application that I would encourage individual cities to go it alone. That just doesn't seem to be the vibe from the notice of funding opportunity. There is a certain bureaucratic hassle to doing a coalition application. There's a memorandum of understanding that has to be agreed upon, which requires lawyers. And we are working with EPA to try to get them to relax that requirement so that there could be letters of intent by the application due date of April 1, and then actually signing an MOA only by the fall of 2024. But you all should be aware of that as you think about coalitions. There's a good argument there for having it not be groups of cities themselves, but potentially an RPA that does an application on behalf of others. So you just we need to think that through a bit. With respect to specific measures, we are very focused on the transportation and the building sector. We've gotten some feedback from stakeholders that we should also be considering things in the power sector. I mentioned offshore wind, but also resilience. And the NOFO is, and in particular microgrids, the Chelsea microgrid VPP project, and sort of using that as a model to go statewide. We're looking hard at what the criteria are that are out in the NOFO. We love lots of ideas and we kind of want to gather all the ideas, and then we need to see what fits and scores best according to the EPA rules. So again, gratitude to MAPC. We are meeting bi-weekly and thinking closely. So if you talk to one of us, you're talking to all of us, and excited to be here. Back to you, Sasha and Jeremy.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think in the interest of time, I think we'll keep things moving. I will note that we are excited to work with you all on coordinating your ideas. There is unfortunately a limit to both in terms of our capacity and the number of applications we could pull together on your behalf, and also just from EPA's perspective. There's each eligible class of applicant can only lead one application or submit one application as the lead of a coalition, but can support, be parts of any number of other coalitions. So again, that emphasis on trying to, the encouragement to focus on regional or multi-state coalitions. So then we'll keep things moving, but and go on to other questions from the folks on the line, but we welcome in the future. And if you have any ideas about where you would like to see our coordination efforts on the implementation grant side, we certainly welcome them.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Jeremy and Jonathan and Diana. So let's see, I have one question that came in through the chat. If there are other questions, please feel free to ask them now, and then we're going to be going into breakout rooms soon. There is a question about if Lawrence, Massachusetts is part of our region, and the answer is yes. So Lawrence, the city of Lawrence and sort of the greater Lawrence area is considered part of our MSA. Our metro statistical area, or the region, goes up through southern New Hampshire. We are working with our other sister RPAs and RPCs on some of the engagement. So the other RPAs may be doing some similar listening sessions and outreach with their regions. And so a lot of our outreach for today's listening session focused on MAPC's region, as well as CBOs and nonprofits from across the MSA, but we expect similar conversations to this to be happening with like Merrimack Valley and Northern Middlesex, NMCOG, Old Colony Planning Council, and then up in Southern New Hampshire as well. Let's see, I'm not seeing other, oh yes, Cindy. Do you have a question?
Hello, everybody. Thanks. I figured I would just ask my question rather than type it in the chat. I'm the chair of the Sustainable Lexington Committee, and so thank you for pulling this together. I've got a number of different questions. One is, there was a mention that, so MAPC, we're going to have a regional climate action plan. There's a state climate action plan, and I feel, and there's many other, you had already recognized that many other communities have already put together climate action plans. So it's not like we don't know what those 10 to 15 things are. Like we pretty much know. So I'm hoping, I want to sort of, I'm hoping that we're able to reduce, redundancy as much as possible. And maybe like there's some draft, and forgive me, maybe the state already has a climate action plan. I know there's the CECP. I've looked at a lot of the stuff that the state has done. Like, when can we expect to have sort of this list of things? One, and maybe even a draft list, right? Because if you're not going to be done until March 1st, but then, you've only got 30 days to get, to get actual grant applications in, that's a shorter time than what we have now. So is there going to be sort of a super draft, so just so we can get an idea of what people are talking about, and so that you can make sure that communities are looking at it and saying, oh yes, we've identified all these great things, but we're really missing this one thing, which, I'm looking for maybe a draft. And in terms of applications, I'm wondering, on the state side, is the state side going to try and sort of put this together with like the federal money from the IRA that's coming to states, that I think is mostly for income limited residents? Because I hear you saying we want to focus on, yes, transportation, but also building. So we know that that's going to be something that we've got to get to work on, and I'm excited to work on that. So I'm wondering if those are together. And yeah, awesome. If the state applies and wants to buy a gajillion heat pumps, that would be great. But then we got to know, right? We've got to coordinate, know who's applying for what, because then we shouldn't be applying, other regional entities shouldn't be applying for buying a gajillion cold climate, good heat pumps that are really going to work for everybody. So I would suggest, coordination on that front. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. I'll try to tackle the first question and also say that part of the breakouts today is to get all of those ideas out. So if there are priorities that you're working on currently, or projects that you want to see implemented like in the next 3 to 5 years, those are the types of things that we want to include in our PCAP. We're developing this big list now, but we're hoping that by mid-January, those 10 to 15 measures for our regional PCAP will be decided upon. So, but that's why the connection between the PCAP and the implementation grants are really important to continue to engage in these conversations, if that's something that is on your radar. And I'll pass it to you, Jonathan, to answer the question, and then we'll get into breakout rooms so everyone can have.
I'll be quick, Sasha. Thanks. Yeah. So Cindy, I think you're right. We do know the 10 or 15 or the 5 or 10 big ideas, and I would love to see your list, and maybe we can chat offline about what that list is. But then when you get into it and you start reading the NOFO, so for example, offshore wind, right? This whole decarbonization thing is not going to work for the region without offshore wind. But then you look at the NOFO and they give it an extra 20 points for projects that have greenhouse gas emission reductions in the 2025 to 2030 timeframe. So pretty hard for us in 2024 to kick off an offshore wind project that's going to yield GHG emission reductions in those 5 years. We know we need to do a clean heat standard, but like a clean heat standard is a regulatory thing. It doesn't really require $200 million. So, we know we want to electrify all the MTA buses, but there is like a time lag there because of the supply chain. And $500 million is frankly like a drop in the bucket for MTA buses. So figuring out how you match the opportunities with the rules and the amount of money. There also are rules about how many applications we can do. I think all of us should be thinking of at least 3. A coalition one of many states, a state one, and then a group of cities. And there may be more than one group of cities, but we should recognize that those are probably going to be competing with each other. And we should be thoughtful about which sectors and which measures. If we all go for buses, we're all going to be competing against buses. And they say right up, we're not going to fund buses for like 2 groups of cities in the same state. Like, not going to happen. Get your act together, push them, do a single application. So yes, we're thinking about this. And Cindy, I love your energy and look forward to chatting more.
Great. Thanks all. So in order to make sure that everyone has enough time for discussions and sharing your thoughts and ideas, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Allie, right now. She's going to share a little bit about what we'll be doing in our breakout groups.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sasha. So before we get into breakout groups, I just want to share some definitions and examples so we are all on the same page going into those discussions. So we've talked a lot about this idea of a greenhouse gas reduction measure, and that's what will be included in both the PCAP and CCAP. And just to be clear, we're thinking about this quite broadly. So by a measure, we mean a strategy, program, policy, or project that groups of municipalities and or a regional entity can implement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, advance equity priorities, which might include improving public health, reducing energy, housing, transportation cost burdens, especially those benefits to low and moderate income households and environmental justice communities. And as Sasha mentioned, we're really right now prioritizing the 3 largest emitting sectors in our region. So I will start by just breaking those down a bit and providing some examples of what we mean when we say the energy or power sector. So this broadly includes electricity generation and then also the transmission and distribution of electricity. A disclaimer, none of these slides I present are necessarily comprehensive, and there's overlapping definitions of different sectors, but this is more illustrative. So when we talk about electricity generation, what are the types of solutions or measures we mean? That could be procuring 100% renewable energy, enabling or developing community solar, advocating for offshore wind, looking at what distributed energy resources can be installed in communities, and taking actions like municipal aggregation if a municipality hasn't yet done that. And then on the transmission and distribution side, there's a lot of work going on around grid modernization, smart meters, AMI. There's a lot of opportunity for rate design and rate reform, looking at utility scale, energy storage, or other types of non-wires alternatives. And a co-benefit of all of the above is an improvement in reliability and resilience, which we know are essential to achieving our decarbonization goals. And then moving on to the transportation sector, we broadly group this into public transit, municipal and personal vehicles, and then micro mobility. So on the public transit side, of course, electrification of our buses, trains, and other forms of transit, transit-oriented development, like high density mixed use development that's either required or encouraged near public transit, dedicated bus lanes, expanding transit, and especially improving the reliability and frequency of public transit. And then we look at vehicles, building out more public charging stations, creating or advertising incentives for electric vehicles, electrifying municipal school bus fleets, streamlining and overall improving the process for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, developing some innovative car sharing or carpooling programs, or on more policy side, looking at ideas of congestion pricing. And then finally, in micromobility, really looking at how we can create safe, accessible, and connected bike lanes and sidewalks for pedestrians, looking at bike share and other e-mobility programs, implementing complete streets plans, potentially lowering speed limits or installing traffic calming measures, and then other ideas of creating micro mobility maps and other broader public awareness campaigns. And then finally, on buildings, we're looking at energy efficiency and electrification. Of course, there's a lot of overlap between these two categories, as you can see, but broadly, there's already a lot of financing incentive rebates programs, and there's room for more, both for energy efficiency technologies and also on the right for electrification measures such as heat pumps, induction stoves, on-site renewable energy. And then for both of energy efficiency and electrification, really expanding education and technical assistance to businesses, homeowners that actually want to and need to install these measures. For energy efficiency, looking at and electrification, looking at building performance standards as a potential policy lever, and demand response programs. And then on the electrification side, restricting new fossil fuel infrastructure, whether that's through zoning or codes, and similarly requiring buildings to be EV ready, solar ready, or other requirements of this nature. So I realized that was very quick, but we are really looking forward to hearing all of your thoughts on these. This is not a comprehensive list, and so we want to know what you all are working on in these three sectors. And so the questions that we're going to discuss when we go into our breakout groups are, the first two questions pertain to within each sector, what are you currently working on or you're planning to work on in the next 5 years? And what challenges have you faced or might you anticipate facing related both to the sector and the relevant stakeholders that either you represent or work with? And then after going through each sector, we want to discuss that in addition to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, what else are your priorities, you and the communities you represent? So what co-benefits are you prioritizing? And then how would you think about measuring these co-benefits? So we will soon be breaking out into breakout groups. You'll be randomly assigned to one, and we'll be in these groups for about it'll probably end up being 35-ish minutes, and we're hoping to spend around 8 to 10 minutes in each sector. And the facilitator and note taker in your group will send a link to a Jamboard. They'll do a brief demonstration of how to use it, and then we'll have time for discussions and brief reports when we come back. So I think with that, you should see a pop-up to enter a breakout room shortly.
Allie, can I ask a quick question about the breakout rooms? Oh.
Yeah, go ahead. Or maybe Sasha, you can take the question.
Yes,
and so
you
I
can,
go.
if you want to stop sharing your screen.
Yes.
And then hop to your room, and then I'm going to stay behind so I can answer questions as needed. I'm also going to stop